Specflow tutorial part 3 Specflow configuration. In part 2 we have learned about the Specflow extension and the requirement. So in this session we are going to learn about the unit test provider for the Specflow, and we are also going to download a NuGet packages. Those are required to write and execute the test cases with respect to the Specflow. And then we are also going to talk about the Specflow templates, and at the end we are also going to learn about the Specflow configurations file. So let me start this session. So when we guys are talking about the unit test provider, so first question comes in our mind, what is a unit test provider? In C# in the .NET technologies, we are using a unit test provider to execute and write the test cases. And if you talk about a unit test provider in the Specflow, we have three different type of the unit test providers. One is a NUnit, XUnit, and a MS test. We can see these unit test providers are not the Specflow unit test provider. So these test providers are provided by the C# language, or you can say .NET technology providers to execute and write the test cases. If you talk about a Specflow specific unit test providers, we already have a one unit test provider. We call it as a SpecRun, but now support of that particular unit test provider is no more. So that is the reason behind it. I have listed only these three unit test providers, and we use these unit test provider to execute the test cases. So when we guys are talking about a unit test provider, whenever we want to write and execute the test cases, then what we need to do is we need to download a NuGet packages. So the first question comes up in our mind, what is a NuGet? NuGet is a package manager used or provided by the Microsoft technology, and we use this NuGet to create, host, and download a NuGet packages. If you talk about a package is nothing but a compiled code. Take an example of if you are creating one of the project and you want to expose the functionality of that project to a third person, to the third party, you will create a package with the help of the NuGet, and you will expose the functionalities of that particular project. When we guys are talking about the NuGet packages for the Specflow, we have a different type of the Specflow NuGet packages. One is a Specflow NUnit. If you want to use NUnit test provider in your automation framework, then you need to download this NUnit NuGet package. And if you want to use a Specflow XUnit, and if you want to use a Specflow MS test. So these are the different NuGet packages provided by the Specflow to us. So whenever you want to use any of the unit test provider, then we need to download these NuGet packages in our automation framework or in our project. If you talk about the utilization of these three unit test providers, we can use only a single unit test provider in our project. If you want to use an unit, then you cannot use XUnit, and you cannot use the MS test. Another NuGet package is Specflow tools MS build generation. So this is going to generate a CS file for the corresponding feature files. Let me go to Visual Studio to download and understand these different NuGet packages. So right now we already have one project with us. That project is a unit test provider project. We are using an NUnit to execute and write the test cases. So this project we are going to use to download a further NuGet packages related to a Specflow. In this project we already have a NUnit package. So let's do one thing. Let's delete this NUnit. We are going to download a NuGet package for a Specflow NUnit. So right click on this and say remove. If you want to download a NuGet packages, then right click on the project, go manage NuGet packages. And we can see we have different tabs. One is a browse, install, and updates. So this install tab is going to display all the available NuGet packages in your project. And if you want to browse or if you want to download a new NuGet packages, then first you need to search the NuGet packages here in this browse tab. So let's do one thing. Let's search for a Specflow. And we can see we have a different NuGet packages. One is a Specflow NUnit, XUnit, and MS test. So depending upon your requirement, depending upon your need, you can download a different unit test provider. We are going to use this Specflow NUnit test provider instead of using XUnit and a MS test. Select this NUnit, and we can see we have this drop down and an install button. Whenever we click on this install button, it is going to download a specific selected NuGet package for your project. Right now we have a different pre-releases as well as a stable versions of this particular Specflow NUnit. We are getting a pre-releases and these beta versions. The reason is we have selected this include pre-release checkbox. if you uncheck this, and we can see right now we don't have a pre-releases and a beta versions. We are only going to get a stable versions. And if you want to have the pre-releases or if you want to have the beta versions, then check this include pre-releases, and you can see a different pre-releases as well as the beta versions of this particular Specflow NUnit. So we are going to install this current stable versions right now. One is 3.9.74. Select this and click on install. It will install a specflow.NUnit. Along with Specflow NUnit, it is also going to install a few more NuGet packages. One is a Specflow NUnit, internal JSON, Specflow NUnit, Gherkin, and a body. So these are the different packages. So this NUnit is depending upon all these packages as well. So that is the reason behind it. It is also downloading these packages as well. Click on OK. And it is going to install. We can see we have this Specflow NUnit with us. We have this NUnit, and inside the NUnit we have the Specflow. With the Specflow we have the body, Gherkin, Specflow, internal JSON, system value. So this NUnit is having a different other packages as well. Along with the Specflow, this Specflow NUnit needs other packages as well, or you can say these are the dependent packages of this Specflow NUnit. So depending upon the unit test provider, we can download a NuGet packages. So if you talk about a different templates, we have a different templates available with the Specflow. One is the feature files, hooks, JSON configuration, and the step definitions. If you want to see the different type of the templates, then what you need to do is right click on the project and add new item. And we can see we have this Specflow option available under the installed options. This Specflow is having a different type of the items. One is a Specflow feature file. Whenever you want to write the test cases, then you need to use this particular Specflow feature files. And if you want to write a test cases in English, then you can use it. And the default is English. If you want to write the test cases in the French, German, and the Dutch as well. So depending upon your requirement, you can download a different items to write the test cases. We have the Specflow hooks. We are going to learn about this hooks later in the sessions. We have a step definitions and a Specflow plus runner profiles. So Specflow is not going to support this particular item further because they have stopped the support of the Specflow run. And if you talk about a Specflow configuration, so we have the Specflow configuration as well. So whenever you want to execute your test cases in a specific language, then you need to set the Specflow JSON configuration for the Specflow as well. So let's do one thing. Let's select the Specflow JSON configuration. And whenever you select Specflow JSON configuration, you need to provide a specific name, a Specflow. If you provide some other name, then Specflow is not going to detect this particular file. So Specflow.json file, click on add, and we can see we have different options available. And this Specflow JSON is a JSON file with a different options. One is a language and is a binding culture. So whenever you want to write and execute the test cases specific to the English US, then we can mention it here. If you want, you can change language or option to some other language as well. So one more important point with respect to the Specflow JSON, whenever you execute your test cases, we need this Specflow JSON in the output folder. And if you talk about the output folder, let me see the output folder here of this test project. Right click on this, go to open folder in File Explorer, go to bin, debug, and a net48. So with respect to this particular test project, the output folder is this debug net48. So whenever we are going to execute the test cases, okay, whenever we do a build of this project, automatically few DLLs and the files will be added here in this output folder, because whenever we are going to execute the test cases or whenever we execute the project, execution is going to happen in this particular folder. Let's do one thing. Let's build this project and see the impact here. Let's have a rebuild. Let's go to this output folder and we can see we have a different DLL. So these DLLs are nothing but the packages which we have downloaded in our project. This is the output folder. Whenever we are going to execute our test cases, whenever we are going to execute our project, execution is going to happen at here because this folder is having a different DLLs, and these DLLs are nothing but the NuGet packages which we have downloaded in our project. It means whenever we do the execution, we need to have the changes of this Specflow.json file in this folder as well. It means whatever the changes which we are going to do is we need to have the changes in this particular file as well. To achieve that, what we need to do is right click on this project, go to properties, and we have this option copy to output directories. Right now it is having a do not copy, and it is having a three options: do not copy, copy always, and a copy if newer. So if we select this copy always, so whatever the changes which you are going to do it, those are going to be the part of this particular specflow.json. If you say do not copy, it means whatever the changes which you are going to do it, those will not be available during the execution. So that is the reason behind it. We always do copy always. If you want, you can select a copy if newer as well. So if we select a copy if newer, it means if we make a slight changes here, then this file will be copied. If you are not making any change and the copy is already there in the form of the specflow.json file, then it is not going to override the changes. If we are saying copy always, regardless of the changes, it is going to copy every time this specflow.json file in the output folder. So this specflow.json file is a configuration file, and the specflow's behavior can be configured extensively. How to configure a specflow depends on the version of a specflow you are using. Starting Specflow 3, we can use a specflow.json file to configure. It is mandatory for a .NET Core project. If you are using a .NET Core instead of having a .NET framework in your project, then you have to use a specflow.json file to get the changes related to a project. If you are not using the specflow.json file for the .NET Core, then the impacts related to a configuration of that particular specflow is not going to happen. If you are using a .NET framework project, then you can use a specflow.json file, as well as you can use a XML file as well. So specflow.json file is having a one option in the property. We call it as a copy to output directory. We need to set copy always or copy if newer, otherwise the configuration specified in the specflow.json file is not going to take effect during the test execution. Keep in mind, whenever you are having some values in the specflow.json file, or you want to have those values, or you can say, or you want to have the impact of those changes during the execution, then you need to set the properties to copy always or copy if newer. If you talk about the additional resources, I have already created one course that is on the Udemy, and that course help you to learn a professional automation framework creation with the C#, Specflow, and the Selenium. So that course is going to help us to create an enterprise level automation framework with the different design patterns: builder design pattern, singleton design pattern, a strategy design pattern, and dependency injection design pattern. So this is the one of the most important design pattern, where we guys are not creating the object with the help of the new operator. So this dependency injection design pattern helping us to create the object without utilizing a new operator. Another is a IOC design pattern. So these all design patterns helping a automation framework which we have created in this Udemy course, making a more robust and a more reliable as well. So this course help us to build the thought pattern for designing and targeting the framework, and this course also help us to build the capabilities to understand any complex code base. So after completing the course, you will able to create your own professional level automation framework. After completing this course, you will able to create your own professional level automation framework from the scratch, not with this language but with the other languages as well, because a framework development is not dependent on any of the language. So framework code also uploaded with the course. If you want, you can enroll that particular course on the Udemy. Please subscribe this channel to have the notifications of a new automation related sessions.